Okay, so up until this point, we've been writing programs that run, do some stuff, and then exit and don't remember anything, right? So while our program is running, it will remember the objects that we created, the variables that we created. But once the program is done running, it forgets all of those, right? Just saves them in memory, doesn't really persist that data. And so today we're going to start talking about persisting data and writing programs that when they exit, they still can save state, basically, right? What we will do next week is talk about a database, a SQL database. So that's like a database that we'll use in production for larger programs and stuff like that. Just to get used to thinking about how does our program interact with a place where it is storing data, a database, we're going to start by using something called a CSV file. So instead of a database, we're just going to use a file, right? So a file will be where we store our state. Very similar to, like, you know, you write something in Word and then you save it and it saves it in a file, right? And then that file is how it persists. The Word program shuts down. The program doesn't remember anything. But when I open that file, it pulls all the data from the file and then I can start manipulating it again, right? So there are a bunch of different ways to persist data. There are databases like SQL or Oracle. We persist data in spreadsheets, right? We persist data in, like I said, Word documents. There are a bunch of different ways to do it. We're going to use something called CSV. Has anybody ever heard of CSV before? Yeah, if you've used spreadsheets before, you might have used CSV files. And all CSV stands for is comma separated values. Comma separated values. And what it is it's just a format, an expected format for saving data, right? So if we think about it, like when my program pulls data, say it's like a list of usernames and addresses, right? When my program pulls that stuff, the computer isn't going, I might be able to look at like a string of data and be like, that's the name, that's the address, that's the phone number, because I, as a human, can recognize that stuff, right? But a computer isn't that smart. It just sees a string, right, of characters, and it doesn't, a string of numbers and a string of like names, there's no meaning, right? We have to apply meaning to that. So when we store data, it's important that we store it in an expected format, something that the computer knows, like, oh, like the first line of this file is like a bunch of names, and the second line of this file is a bunch of addresses, right? Like it needs to expect some sort of format, right? We're going to see this a lot. We're going to deal with a lot of different formats for saving data. You might have heard of JSON at this point, which is just like an expected format for data so that we can organize it, and then our computer can understand how to do what's called parsing. Does anybody know what parsing is? It's just like taking data and like separating it in a meaningful way, right? We'll get used to that because we're going to do a ton. Okay, so I'm going to just start doing it and explain it as I go, and hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer. I'm just going to make a folder, we'll just call it CSV, and we'll open it in VS Code. Cool. No, let's just do it. Okay. So, like I said, instead of having a database, we're just going to have a file that acts as our database. And we're going to use CSV files, again, comma separated values, so that when we tell Python, hey, read from this file, it will know how to separate the data for us, basically, how to break the data up. So first I'm going to make a CSV file. I'm just going to do touch. I'm just going to follow along here too. So the example here is NFL teams .csv. Cool. So you can see my editor recognized it has this little icon. You might have noticed for Python files, it has an icon. So it knows what CSV is. I'm going to open it and it's blank right now. It says I can download something, but I'm not going to. So now I have a CSV file. So I'm going to put some data inside of this CSV file. I'm just going to copy it here. Cool. So, can everybody see that? So a CSV file works by lines and it works with commas. That's all we really need to know. Lines and commas, right? So when I tell Python to read this file, it's going to read it line by line, and it's going to separate. When it gets to a comma, it's going to say that's a new value, right? So the first line, the way very commonly we will see CSV files set up as like columns and rows. Like you might see this in like a spreadsheet or whatever. Most databases, in some way, shape, or form, strive for this columns and rows type of thing, right? Where it'll look like a spreadsheet, even though we might not be able to see it like that. That's kind of how we can think about it or visualize it in our head. So we'll have like if we had a spreadsheet of, like I was talking about names before, it might have like name, address, and phone, right? So these are my column names. That'll be my first row. And then every row after that will be values for these, right? So Josh, I'm not going to tell you my address, and my phone number is 5. Cool. We can do Kyle. Your address is here. Who cares? And 6, right? So we get these separated, right? This is like really clear. The way this translates to our CSV file is we just know our first row will always, in this case, we don't have to have headers like this, but in this case, our first row is headers. So ID is just a unique ID for each like record in our database. Then the next thing is team, their wins and their losses. Cool. That's our first row. Our second row is the actual data, right? So data for Patriots, data for Bears, and data for the Jets. And the first thing will be the ID. The second thing will be the team name. The third thing will be the wins. And the fourth thing will be the losses. And it's all separated by commas, right? Now, this is an extremely small data set and an extremely small file. You can imagine if this was enormous, right? If this had like all of the like, I don't know, people with Gmail accounts, right? This could be thousands and thousands of lines of data, and it's only separated by commas. It's extremely difficult to read, and it's not really meant for us to read. It's just a way for the computer to store it so that it can access it later. Cool. And the important thing is that it uses these commas to separate and say, like, this is a new value, this is a new value. Questions on that? Okay. So we have a file with some data in it. So now, how do we bridge this gap where we say, hey, Python, I want you to read this data and start using it in a way that I can manipulate it, right? And read and write to this database. So I'm going to make a new file, a Python file. Teams.py. Kill that. And oops. Teams.py over here. What am I doing? Okay. Rid of that. I'm down here. Okay. So, like I said, there are many different ways to write. There are many different types of files that Python can write to, and there are many different ways to do it. CSV is pretty common if you're going to use a file to store data. And the reason we use it is, one, it's pretty simple to use, and two, Python comes with a built-in library that knows how to deal with CSV files, right? So we don't have to write a lot of logic that says, like, hey, when you see a comma, make that a new value. Python will already kind of know how to do that because it has this built-in library. And so we just have to import it, and it's just called CSV. And let me show you over here, too. Shrink this down. I think it's right in, is it in here? Yeah. So the Python documentation for CSV file has a lot of the information I'm going to go over. You're going to be on this page quite a bit today, because I am not going to show you every single thing you're going to need to know with these CSV files to accomplish what you need to accomplish basically for the rest of the week, right? So you're going to have to start learning how to dig through the documentation. That is a huge part of programming, and the sooner you get used to it, the better, right? So this link is in today's challenges, and it is in the lesson that I'm going over today, which is right here. But this is a built-in Python library. So we've seen, I want to touch on this real quick, and then I'll get back to it. So that's the documentation. We've seen, now today, we've used import statements in 2 different ways already today, right? One, I was saying from another file, import this class or import this function and bring it in. So that's one way, right? We can import stuff from other files. Another way is maybe I downloaded an outside library. That was IPython, right? IPython is not with that embed function. That's not built, that doesn't come with Python all by itself. I had to download that separately. I had to do like pip install IPython. I'm not going to run it again because I already have it. And this says, hey, someone wrote a library called IPython, and it's out there, and I want you to go get it and download it for me, right? So I ran that. That library is now on my computer, but it's not loaded automatically. So I have to say from IPython import, and I just want the embed function, right? So that's a second way. So 1, I'm importing from another file. 2, I downloaded a library, and I want to import that library. The third way that we've already done is Python has some built-in libraries, but it doesn't load them by default. And that was random. Random was one thing. That's built into Python, but it's not, it doesn't load it by default because it's not a thing you use every day. CSV is the same thing. It's that third category. Built into Python, but it's not loaded automatically. So I need to tell Python to load it. We go down those import statements. Cool. So I'm going to import CSV, and that's going to give me a ton of functions and methods I can use to start dealing with this CSV file, right? So I'm going to do with open, and then I'm going to pass it the file name, and relative to where it is, and since it's in the same directory, I can just say NFL teams.csv, and then as file, I'm just going to call it file. I can call it whatever I want. I'm going to call it file. We'll call it, let's call it R file, just to be specific. And then I'm gonna, okay, so with open, all we need to know about with right now in the with keyword is that this is gonna help us deal with files without screwing anything up, right? When we tell Python to open a file, it's very important that we also tell it to close the file at the end and that we check for errors, blah, blah, blah. With is a keyword that kind of takes care of all that for us, right? It will open the file, will also automatically, I believe, close it for us so that we don't risk leaving it open and screwing things up. So don't worry about it beyond that. That's all we need to know is we just use with when we need to deal with files, and it will save us some headaches. So I'm going to say with, and then I'm going to say I want you to open this file, and I want you to save, when you open it, save all that data in a variable called R file. Cool? So now in this block, I have access to R file. I'm going to print it. It's not going to really look like anything useful to us, but just so we can step by step see what we're doing, I'm going to print R file. So all I'm telling Python to do is import the CSV library, open this file, save it to a variable, and print that variable. Teams.py. And you can see I get this giant object, right? It's called an IO text IO wrapper. We don't really need to deal with that. It has a name, mode we'll get to in a second, and then it tells me the encoder, right? So not super useful, but it's an object, right? And so as with any object in Python, it has methods attached to it that I can call to start manipulating and doing things with it. And actually, let's take a tiny sidebar. If you ever want to know the methods and attributes that are available to you with an object, you can wrap it in, is it dir? Okay, so now what I'm saying here is I want you dir is going to, well, let's just print it and see. I think this will work with this. Yeah. So if I wrap any object in this dir function, and then I'm going to print it, it'll just return me a list of attributes and methods that I can call on that object, right? So let's see. I can turn it into a dictionary. The first ones, these dunder methods, are usually just built-in ones that you get with any class. And then the closer we get down here, I can call the encoding. I can read the file. Something called new lines. This write, I can write to it, right? These are all functions that are available to me. So this is just a quick, like, easy way if you're looking for a way to manipulate the. Sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. My bad. Okay, cool. So we have this file object, but we're not really doing anything with it yet. So what I want to do is I can tell the CSV library, hey, I have a CSV file and I want you to read it for me. So I need to make something called a reader. Again, this variable I'm just calling reader. It could be anything. But then I'm going to say CSV dot reader, and I'm going to pass it our file. Cool. Now let's print this. It's still not going to really look like anything we can use, but we have changed. Now I have a CSV reader object, right? So again, I know it's really abstract, but we've opened the file, we've saved it. Python turns the file into like a file object, something it can deal with. Then we've passed that object to CSV, which turns it into a CSV reader object, okay? So now we have that. Now finally we can start reading from it. These reader objects are iterable. So I can say for row in reader, print row. Okay, let's run this. Okay, and now I have the data from my file. And what it's done is because we've used the CSV library, it knows that because CSV files always are comma separated values, it knows, hey, I'm going to read the file. Every time I get to a comma, that's a new value. So I'm going to put it in a new place in my list, right? And then it's going to return me a list for each row. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Cool. So this is one way I can read the file. Now from here, I can do, let's say we had like team objects, right? I had a class team. I could make like a new team for each row, and I could say like, let's see, it would be like row at 0 is going to be the ID, right? Is this making sense, or is this too abstract? Row at 1 would be the team, and like I could start creating an object that represents the row of data, right? And this is where we're ultimately going. This is where we're ultimately going. This is how we almost always are going to end up working, is we'll have a database with rows of data. CSV, SQL, who gives a shit? It's just rows of data. And eventually I want to bring each row in and like make an object out of that row. And the reason I do that is because now Python can interact dynamically with that data because it understands objects. It does not understand rows of text, but it understands objects.
Then once you create that object, then you can add more stuff that will go into the other file too.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about writing to the file after this. Yeah. So then I can also, then what I want to do is like maybe I make new objects. I want to take all that data from the object and write it back to the file, right? Okay. So this is very simply, this is pretty much it for reading print row, and it'll return us these arrays, right? One other thing I can do is maybe I don't want arrays, maybe I want dictionaries. CSV can do that too. I can just change this to a dict reader, I think. Yeah. Pass it to file, same thing. Run it, and it'll give me an ordered dictionary with the data, right? If I want to turn that into a regular dictionary, I can wrap it in this dict function, And now I get a bunch of regular dictionaries, right, with my key value pairs. Now, CSV is smart enough to know, hey, that first line is going to be all my keys, right? And then it'll assign the values. So this library is really helpful because it knows how to parse through this data and give me something meaningful back, right? Cool, questions?
You didn't have that top row, would it?
I actually have no idea what it would do. Let's find out. I think it might, yeah, I think it might assume. So if I use the dictionary reader, I better have some headers, right? And you're not always gonna have headers, but you might. Let's just run it. Yeah, it's gonna use the first row as the headers always. Yeah, stupid computer. You moron. Okay, cool. So now I have some dictionaries. Now, just a little hint. Remember the other day when we were instantiating classes with dictionaries? Remember we were just passing it the dictionary? That might help you this week, right? As you read and write from these CSV files. Okay, so that's reading from it. Now let's talk about writing really quick. All of this is in your curriculum, by the way. Okay, so when I call this open function, just like this, it automatically assumes that I want to read. So it just reads by itself. But there are a bunch of different things I can do to files, and there's a handy little table here in your curriculum for today. There are different modes I can set. So I can read only to a file. I can read and write from a file. I can write. You don't have to memorize these. These are just, you should know that these things are available to you, right? That you can do different things to a file. So what I want to do is I want to change this function so that instead of reading from the file, I am able to write to the file. So let me copy this. I'll comment it out for now, paste it here. And I can do that by passing this optional argument here, mode equals write, or W for write. Here, cool. And then instead of making a reader, I make a writer. And that this is going to be CSV dot writer. And then it needs to know what file is it writing to. It's going to be our file. And I think that's all we need to pass it for right now. There's more stuff I could pass it here if I wanted to be more specific about how it writes. But I think the default is going to work for us. And then I'm going to get rid of this. And I can say writer dot write row. Row. And let's add another row. Let's say it'll be ID 4. We'll say Giants and 6 and 4. Copy that. Let's do one more. We'll say, what is this one? We'll say the ID should be 5. This will be the Lions, and it is 8 and 2. Okay. All right. If this works, when I run this, Python will open that CSV file, but it will open it in write mode instead of read mode. Then I'm going to use CSV to make a writer that writes to that file. And then I pass that writer information. Now again, the CSV file is smart. It knows if I get a list, I know how to separate that and write it back in comma separated values to the file. So let's run this. I might get a mistake. Let's see. And it so it worked, but what happened?
Well, you added write mode instead.
Yep, I know. Yep. Yeah. So we overwrote everything, right? So this is a huge danger all the time when we are dealing with data, right? We want to add and not overwrite. But it did write. I want to point that out, right? We did write to the file. We just replaced every single thing that was in there, right? So let's, this will happen to you a ton this week as you're experimenting. Thankfully, we can just go to the file and click undo and get all of our data back. When we get to SQL, you can't do that. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But right now, we just do undo. And let's go back and you were absolutely right. We need to append. Yeah, go for it.
Why would I not just go write the CSV
I feel like what you're doing is more complicated.
Just going and typing into the
Just like
CSV file
opening the CSV file
and hand typing everything in. Because if I have like this will be clear in the thing we're doing today. But if I want to write a program where someone is, so you're going to write a school interface over the next week, right? You're going to write a command line program that allows someone to like keep track of students in a school. So if I open my program and I want to like see a whole list of students, or I want to be able, actually it's not going to be that different for that. I'm trying to think of a better way. Like, what? Yeah, but I mean, like when, like any interface that you have, like when you go on Facebook, right? And you create a new account, and then it keeps track of your friends and all this other stuff. Rather than hand entering all this stuff, we can create an interface with Python so that it's much clearer about what we're doing and where we're putting things. Also, I could take all the data. Maybe I have a huge list of students, and I just want to see the students that are failing classes. So then Python can sort through all those objects and say, just show me the people who are, so we can interact and manipulate data much more dynamically if we have it in a program. You're right, for what we're doing right now, making this tiny list, it is a pain. But as our programs get bigger, instead of having to look at like a huge spreadsheet of all this crap, we can sort much more easily, we can add stuff much more easily, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. Okay, so I don't want to write only truncates existing file length to 0. Read and write. I think I want append. Starts at the end of file and adds to the end of the file, right? So let's go back here. Let's change this to append. Let's run this now. And I know why that didn't work. Hold on. We didn't mean a new line. Okay. Run this again, and it'll add those to the end. Cool. So now it's added these to the file. Now the other thing that's great about this is like my Python program is done running. Like it doesn't, it's gone and it forgot about everything, but my data persisted, right? And then I can, next time my Python program opens, I can read from the file, pull all that data in. This is a very typical workflow, right? Your program opens, it grabs a ton of data from a database and loads it in, turns it into objects. Your program runs, you do whatever the hell you're gonna do, and then when you exit or hit save, it writes back to the file and persists that data. Go ahead.
How do we know we have an extra line in our CSV file to prevent what just happened?
As of right now, you're just gonna have to look at the file.
Okay.
And make sure. So yeah, that error that we got before, this where the cursor is in this file matters. So when it was right here and I ran this, it like started where the cursor was and added the giants thing and then went to the new line, and that kind of screwed up my stuff. So what I want to do is just make sure at the end I have this empty line and then write, and it'll write it the right way. Cool. Let's see. Am I missing anything else? Oh, last thing, just like I can read with a dictionary, I can also write with a dictionary, and that's just one other, that's a little bit different. So let's just do that real quick. Again, because we were talking about instantiating classes with dictionaries, and also being able to take an instance of an object and save all those attributes to a file. So for this, I'm going to say writer. And then when I write with a dictionary, I need to pass it some additional information. So I need to say, I call this anything. Let's actually call this headers. Equals, let me copy this. When I write, I want to tell it what are my headers so that it knows how to parse. So I'm going to just save those as an array or as a list right here. And then I'm going to do writer dot write row, and then I'm going to copy this. I want to make it a whole dictionary. That's not lazy. Instead of passing it an array like I did before or a list, I can pass it this dictionary. And because I'm going to tell it, I can pass it this dictionary. And then here I have to say These like things think they're being helpful, and they're getting in my way. Field names equals headers. So I'm making a dictionary writer. I pass it the file I want it to write, and then I have to pass it this additional named argument, which is just an array, so that it knows these are the headers you can expect to see from the dictionary, right? We don't really need to know how it works under the hood, just that it needs this information to work. And now let's delete this. It's going to repeat. Come back over here, and now if we do this, it'll write. Oh, but it didn't do it the way I wanted it to. Maybe for this one, we have to be up here. That is bizarre. I don't know why it's saying that. Anyway, same concept, right? But we can pass it a dictionary. What's up?
You're appending in mode.
I think that's what we want. We want to append to the end.
I think it's because it knows it's a dictionary. It's trying to put each of those in the column.
Oh, that might be why. It might be just the way the dictionary. So there's some quirks that you might have to work through to do this. Okay, so that's it. Don't freak out. The point of this week is not to become an expert at CSV files. You might not really even work with them a lot in your larger career, but you will always be working with persisting data and the idea of having to save data, read data from somewhere, turn it into objects, manipulate it that way. That is the bigger lesson, okay? This syntax stuff, you can if you Google like Python write to CSV file, you will get all this code and you can figure it out, okay? Questions before we move on?
Is that not what you mentioned you was for, Giants? You didn't mean for it to come out like that?
No, I wanted it to come out like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
He was just saying the line that it came out of.
Yeah, when I had it, sorry. For some reason, so before we needed to have this extra line, but when I have this extra line and I write with the dictionary, oh, now it just did work. I don't know. I have no idea. Who knows? I don't know. It's working now, so I'm just not going to touch it. That's my motto. It's working now, don't touch it. Okay, other questions? All right, real quick, let me just talk you through what you're going to do today, and then we'll be done. So you have a word guess CSV. This program is pretty much written for you, but what you're going to have to add is the reading and writing to the CSV file. So the whole point of this one is just to get used to and comfortable with reading and writing data. So you're going to have to kind of refactor an existing program. So first, sit down with your partner, make sure you understand how the program works without the CSV file, and then incorporate the reading to the CSV file, right? You shouldn't really have to write any logic. You're just going to work with the CSV. So that's some practice with CSV. Then you're going to move on to school interface 1. There are 4 parts to this, and you'll do each one for the rest of the week, and it'll build off the one from before. This is a little bit more involved because it's a bigger project. Please read the instructions. Some of the code is given to you. Some of it is deliberately vague so that you have to Google around and figure it out for yourself, okay? But read the instructions. It should tell you step by step what to do and how to get going. And then lastly is bowling, where you will simulate a game of bowling using classes, right? You'll write a program that simulates a game of bowling. This one is way more open-ended, right? So I know some people really, really want, like you can see it's just kind of like gives you a general outline of what it should do. I'll show you my solution tomorrow. The way I did it was just, when I run my program, it creates players, and then it simulates 10 rounds of bowling immediately, and all it does is spit out the final scores. But I try to make it run as real life as possible, right? So like each player gets a turn to bowl, and they bowl some random amount of pins, and I add up the score, and blah, 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 right? So it's just a simulator. It doesn't have to be like an actual video game where someone has graphics or anything like that. It's just simulating a game of bowling, okay? This one's a little challenging, particularly like dealing with the score for bowling. which I had no idea how to do. So I spent more time researching and trying to figure out how to score bowling than actually writing the program. But that's kind of the point of this one, is just to work with classes. Cool. All right. Today I want you to pick a partner. Try to pick someone you haven't worked with yet. Come up with a game plan and get to work.